Aaron Rodgers bashes the Jets over the way they handled his departure from the team, and in doing so, proves the Jets made the right decision. That and more today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, April 18th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Well, on today's show, we are going to talk about the future of the New York Jets. The draft is 1 week away. Who are the Jets looking at with the 7th overall pick? We're going to talk about the present of the Jets. A couple of guys are due contract extensions, and they are making positive impressions by showing up for the voluntary part of the offseason program. But unfortunately, we're going to begin by talking about the past of the New York Jets because Aaron Rodgers went on the Pat McAfee show yesterday and made news because he had a lot to say about the way the Jets handled his departure. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about Aaron Rodgers because, he's in the past, and we got to look to the future. That era, which was, if we're being honest, nothing short of a disaster, is over. But this is national news. This is one of the top stories in the NFL on this Friday, and it's the top story around the New York Jets. So I think it is worth discussing because Rodgers had a lot to say about the way the team handled his departure. In particular, a meeting that he had with Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji after the new head coach and new general manager were hired. And the Jets, of course, with their new regime, decided to move on without Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers was complaining. He said that he flew across the country. He said, I figured when I flew across the country on my own dime that there would be some sort of discussion about his future. And that essentially 20 minutes into the meeting, it was over. And they immediately told him that, we're moving on without you. He was not given a chance to state his case. He was not given an opportunity to make an argument for why he should stay. Rodgers said there was not an ample amount of respect for him in that meeting. He also wondered aloud why the Jets would not pick his brain about their future. And there's a lot to unpack here. I don't think anybody out there, maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think anybody out there is going to be shedding too many tears for Aaron Rodgers that he flew across the country on his own dime. I mean, that's the way Aaron Rodgers travels across the country is a little bit different from the way you or I travel across the country. And I mean, this is an educated guess, but Aaron Rodgers certainly seems like the type of guy where if they had done it over the phone, one of his complaints was they already made their decision and only took 20 minutes. Why did I have to fly across the country? Why could they have not just done it over the phone? I think as well as I do, if they had done it over the phone, Aaron Rodgers would be complaining, why wouldn't you say it to my face? There's really, I think it's really silly and really petty for Rodgers to get upset over something like that. I would imagine from the Jets' perspective, they wanted to say it to his face, and they addressed with him how he wanted them to announce it. They were trying to be respectful. Rodgers apparently having none of it. I have no idea why Rodgers would think that the Jets would want to pick his brain over anything. When was the last time a team cut a player and then asked for that player's advice? I understand Aaron Rodgers, was a unique case, but, the Jets decided they were moving on without him. I mean, what's Rodgers want them to do? Ask his opinion on, Allen Lazard and then maybe do the Costanza and do the opposite of whatever Rodgers tells them about Lazard. But I think this all, it's kind of clear where this all comes from. And there's a bigger point in all of this. Aaron Rodgers is used to being treated a certain way. And that is with complete deference. And that's not unusual for a player who's had the career Aaron Rodgers has had. He's an immortal player. He's going to the Hall of Fame whenever he retires, 5 years later, he'll be in the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. There's no question about that. One of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game. And a guy who was a 4-time MVP, a guy who for over a decade was one of the truly elite passers in the league, a guy who, if he was on your team with a halfway decent supporting cast, you were at the top of the league. You were a contender. And when that happens, your team caters to you a lot. Your team essentially gives you whatever you want. You're never really presented with many situations where you don't get your way, and you're never really presented with many situations where the team's going to do something to make you unhappy. if you look at the way Rodgers handled the end of his tenure in Green Bay, a lot of it came from the fact that they had drafted Jordan Love. He was angry over that. He was angry that, he was not going to be the guy anymore because he'd had such a long and illustrious career in Green Bay. You get used to being the guy. And I think, lots of, I think all the top quarterbacks are like this. I think lots of elite players are like this. It becomes difficult when your play does not justify that degree of deference. And I think that's the point we're at with Aaron Rodgers. And it's true, it's true across sports. I mean, I remember near the end of Derek Jeter's career, and Derek Jeter was an all-time baseball player, all-time great shortstop. He wasn't that good anymore at the end of his career. And there were difficult moments the Yankees had with him. And Derek Jeter is known as, one of the great teammates of all time, one of the great players of all time, one of my favorite players of all time personally, because I'm a Yankee fan. But it's indisputable, he was not the easiest guy to deal with during the end of his career when his play wasn't as good as his reputation was anymore. And, with Rodgers, the big argument for bringing him back was that, he could be the stopgap quarterback. And the argument was, well, who's going to be a better stopgap quarterback than him? And there were a couple of flaws, I think, behind this logic. And I've argued this extensively. One is that his play really was not very good last year. His play was pretty much at the level of a stopgap quarterback you could get for a far cheaper price. And the other aspect of this was the price. Rodgers came with a $37.5 million price tag if he returns this season. But beyond those things, one of the big problems with bringing Rodgers back is that when you have a guy who has been catered to the extent Aaron Rodgers has been through his career, and not unjustly so, not entirely unjustly so, at least. I mean, he has played at the level where he's earned that degree of deference near the end of your career when you're just one of the guys, when the focus is not on you. When, if the team drafts a quarterback, you may be benched if they fall out of the race to get the rookie quarterback some snaps. That's not something you can expect an Aaron Rodgers to buy into. And even if he said he was willing to, it wasn't that hard to see him change his mind once the rubber hit the road. And these comments, these show that he was not willing to take a back seat. These comments show that, he still wanted to be treated with a degree of deference. Players across the league get cut without making a big scene. It happens to thousands of players at the end of training camp every year. But not most of those players will never experience the treatment Aaron Rodgers has gotten through most of his career. His teams have overwhelmingly deferred to him. I mean, you saw what happened with the Jets the last 2 years. Jets gave him everything he asked for. Every time that he wanted the Jets to get a player, the Jets got him that player. Whenever the Jets wanted him, wanted a coaching move. Whenever he wanted a coaching move, the Jets made that coaching move. I mean, crazy that Nathaniel Hackett was still the offensive coordinator at the start of the 2024 season. That was in deference to Rodgers. And Aaron Glenn's coming in. Aaron Glenn wants to establish himself as the leader of the team, as any new coach should when he inherits a losing situation. And if Aaron Rodgers was here, it was always going to be about Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers would always want it to be about Aaron Rodgers. And these statements, well, pick your brain. I mean, why would you pick the brain of a player you cut? That makes no sense. I mean, that literally a statement that could not make less sense. But that's that's Aaron Rodgers' mindset. And on some levels, he's earned the right to feel that way because he's had such an illustrious career. But at this point, that's not worth the price of having Aaron Rodgers. And I don't think we would ever be in a situation where Aaron Rodgers would be likely to defer to Aaron Glenn because, look, he's out here publicly complaining about the way he was treated. This is a guy who he hasn't just been treated well by his teams. I mean, outside of like one short stretch in 2021, the media has never criticized him. I mean, I'm not going to go into what happened in 2021 because that was one point where he was criticized. But like outside of that, media has nothing bad to say about him. I mean, look at the way he played last year and look at the media commentary about him as though he's still an elite quarterback. It's just a situation that was never going to work. And these comments, I think, kind of show his mindset and show you why it would never work. Aaron Rodgers is in the past. Now, head on the Locked On Jets podcast. Let's talk about the present of the team because even though Rodgers is gone, there are still some high-quality players on this roster, two of whom are looking for contract extensions and are earning good reviews for showing up to the voluntary portion of training camp. Let's talk about what showing up for voluntary offseason program means for Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivers incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple. Within a day, you'll have multiple candidates who are qualified to choose from. And instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable top-tier freelancers to scale your business effectively. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com, to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. The Jets offseason program is underway. So over the course of the offseason, there are a handful of practices which teams conduct, and most of them are voluntary. The player has a choice of going or skipping. And if the player skips the practice, they can't be fined. They cannot be disciplined by the team. There's always a lot of coverage about who shows up and who doesn't. But outside of like a brief mini camp at the end of the offseason program, there is one mini camp which is mandatory, which players need to go to, or they will be fined. The most of the offseason program is purely voluntary. Now, sometimes what happens is teams tend to like having their players at mini camp. So what they'll do is you can't fine a player for not showing up, but you can put incentives into a player's contract if he does. So you can say, well, if you show up to the offseason program, we'll give you $30,000 and incentivize a player to show up that way. Frequently in the offseason program, a player who's seeking a new contract will skip it, because it's kind of a way, it's like one of the few mechanisms the player has at his disposal to send a message to the team that, you got to get working on a new contract. So with all this in mind, with the Jets offseason program underway, it did draw some attention that both Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner were in attendance this week. Both Wilson and Gardner are now eligible for contract extensions. The way it works in the NFL is after your third season, you become eligible to sign an extension with your team. So Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner both finished their third season. So there was some speculation, would they sit this out just to try and send a message to the Jets? The answer to that is no, that they were both spotted this week during the offseason program. And the two of them are receiving quite a bit of praise in the media, within the fan base. I think it's nice that they're there. I think, generally speaking, it's nice when guys show up. I actually don't think it makes that big of a deal because, I understand you can make the argument, new coaching staff in town, you want everybody there, you want everybody showing they're committed. But I always try and think about, like, what would my reaction be to the opposite? Would it be a big deal if Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner did not show up to the offseason program? And the answer to that would unequivocally be no. I mean, even last year, you may remember Aaron Rodgers skipped the actual mandatory part of the offseason program to go on a trip to Egypt, which, is a flight that he also paid for on his own dime. But, that got a ton of attention. I did not think it was that big of a deal. Because like Jets stunk last year and Rodgers wasn't good, but it wasn't because he skipped the mini camp. The one that did draw my attention last year was when Hassan Reddick skipped the mini camp, because that was a sign that was clearly due to him being upset with his contract status. Now, if Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner had sat out mini camp, my view on this might be different. But I think it's one of those things. Is mini camp's nice to go to. But the rest of the voluntary part of the offseason program is nice to go to, but I don't think it's really that big of a deal. I mean, my theory on this, and it's actually been backed up by players. I've asked some players this in the past on this show, what they think about the offseason program. And generally the consensus is if you're like a young developing player, the reps you get from the offseason program can be helpful, especially if you need to work on your technique. Outside of that, for the guys who are established, for the veterans, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, Sauce Gardner knows how to prepare for the season. Garrett Wilson knows how to prepare for the season. I guess you want to say that it's good that they're showing up, because Glenn's a new coach and they're making a good impression. Okay, I can buy that. But regardless of what happens here, I think after the draft, the Jets need to focus on getting these two guys extended for the long run. Right now the team's having meetings. They're finalizing their draft board. They're kind of going through the strategies Thursday night, if this happens, who do we pick? If that happens, who do we pick? So there's a lot on their plate right now. But once we get past the draft, the offseason's largely over. We can start to turn our attention to the 2025 campaign. But before that, there's still a couple of months between then and training camp. And that's an ideal time to work out long-term extensions with these guys. Now, the Jets can pick up the fifth-year option for both of these guys because they're first-round picks. The team has a fifth-year option. It's a team option. They can easily pick up both options. And the two players would then have 2 years left on their rookie contracts. But you know what? I think you want to get these deals done as soon as possible because the salary cap is going to keep going up. Salary cap is a percentage of the revenues the league makes. And the league's revenues keep going up because of the TV deal. The league makes most of its money through the TV contracts with CBS and Fox and NBC and ESPN and Amazon. So, the way it works in the NFL, generally speaking, is the cap goes up every year. Aside from once every decade, there's some random event that causes a pause. Like in 2011, there was the lockout. In 2020, COVID cut the league's revenues because they weren't selling tickets that year, at least on a normal scale. But generally speaking, the cap's always going to go up because of the league's finances. And the longer you wait on a contract, the longer you wait to do a deal with players like these, the more you end up paying in the long run. And I also think it's important to send a message of clarity that these two guys have been here. We know that the Jets have had a lot of struggles. I think it would really be important. I think it would be a big message for the Jets to show that these are two premium players who have been here through the losing, but they see a bright future. And they're willing to re-up their contracts. They're willing to stay in New York and help build this thing going forward. Because as we know, Jets have had a tough time in free agency landing guys. I mean, the guys the Jets typically land in free agency are, if you look last year, the Tyron Smiths of the world who don't really have another offer, or guys that they have to pay ridiculous amount. They have to pay a ridiculous premium to get. The Jets have not been a very hot destination for free agents in recent years because of the losing and because of the perception of how much the organization has struggled. So I think that that's only going to change completely when you start winning games. But one thing you can do, the first step would be keeping these two young premium players as your building blocks to build around and, making them the core of the roster and showing again that, despite the struggles, they've seen enough progress in this franchise. They like it here enough that they're going to stay here and you can come join them and you can come build a better Jets team with them. So, I'm not going to sell it. It's not a bad thing that they're at the offseason program. I think it's a positive. It's a minor positive. Where I'll celebrate is the point where these guys are re-signed because that's the moment where the Jets are going to have two premium players for the primes of their careers. And both of them play premium positions, and both of them can be part of building this thing moving forward and getting the Jets out of this difficult situation. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, we've talked about the past, Aaron Rodgers. We've talked about the present, Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson. Let's talk about the future. Less than 1 week till the draft. Who seems like the most likely pick for the New York Jets? It's a player who's getting a lot of buzz, and we'll talk about where he would fit as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices, no console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed series like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney+, Max, and more. Play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost with a console. Already have a console? A Fire Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel while allowing you to take your or your kids' games wherever you plug in. Head to Amazon.com/FireTV-LockedOn to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices including a Fire TV Stick 4K second generation, Fire TV Stick 4K Max first and second generation, and Fire TV Cube third generation. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Friday. We've talked about the Jets' past and Aaron Rodgers. We've talked about their present, their star players, Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner. So it makes sense to finish talking about the Jets' future. And, of course, the NFL draft is coming up It starts in less than 1 week. Thursday night is round 1, and the Jets currently own the 7th overall pick. Of course, they trade up or trade down. That could change, but right now the Jets are slotted 7th. And I thought it might be a good idea to take a look at who the mock drafts are currently projecting the Jets will take with that selection. And of course, look, there's no guarantee the mock drafts are right, but they tend to get it, especially the ones that are from the more connected writers. They tend to give you an idea of who's going to be available at a given spot. So I went to this website, mockdraftdatabase.com, and this is essentially, it's exactly what it sounds like. They compile mock drafts from all over the place. And at this point, their consensus is a guy we discussed a little bit earlier in the week, Armand Membou, tackle out of Missouri. And I did a show a couple of days ago where I broke him down. We did a couple shows this week where we broke prospects down. I did Ted McMillan early in the week. Yesterday, I went to Tyler Warren. But Membou is a guy who's generated a lot of buzz. He's kind of been a riser as the process has moved forward. He wasn't at the end of the season when the Jets first got the 7th overall pick. There was not a lot of talk about Armand Membou being an option there, but he's a guy who's had a good process. He's improved his stock to the point where now he seems very plausible as the 7th overall pick. And one thing I would say is, if you look at the positions where the Jets are really, really weak right now, there are 2 that kind of come to mind. One is right tackle, and one is wide receiver. And wide receiver, of course, they have Garrett Wilson. So wide receiver is not bad from the sense that they have Garrett Wilson, but once you get past Garrett, they're number 2, 3, 4, 5 receivers. That's about as weak of a group as exists in the NFL. But because you have Garrett Wilson, I don't know that the wide receiver group's good enough, but it's going to be functional. And right now at right tackle, I don't know that the Jets can make it work with Okorafor, who they signed from New England. He's a guy who's hasn't made it through the season without getting benched since 2022. And even in that season, he was never a guy who was great to begin with. And the last couple of years, you've seen his play decline. When the Jets signed him, I had no issue with the signing. I felt like on a cheap deal, a guy with starting experience, a guy who might be a good depth player, it's worth doing. But I don't think that the Jets can really live with him as a starter at right tackle. I think that's going to be a big issue. But that doesn't mean you automatically pick the right tackle at 7, because there are other factors that come into play. You talk about long-term potential, and it's also possible Membou goes before the Jets pick at 7. But I think that if you're looking at what pick could address the Jets' need, the Jets' most dire need, it probably would be Membou. Now, as I mentioned on the show the other day, I think there are questions whether he's a plug-and-play guy. I think he's a guy who's, he's an impressive prospect. If you look at him physically, he fits the mold of what you want in a tackle. He's young. He had success at a young age in college, which is typically a good predictor as to the caliber of a prospect. But I think, there are fundamentals he's got to figure out. I think that there are, especially with his hand usage, the technique's not always flawless. And I think a lot of this comes down to, can the offensive line coach teach him quickly? It's very difficult to get quality play on day one from a tackle prospect, even one who is drafted highly. Last year the Jets picked Olu Fashanu, set 11th overall. They started at 10. They traded down 1 slot, so Minnesota could trade out for J.J. McCarthy. And when Fashanu played early in the season, it was a struggle. It took him about the halfway point of the season before he was really ready to take over after Tyron Smith got injured and played at a high level. So, look, there are questions there about how much Membou could provide you right off the bat, but, it's pretty clear that, the candidates who are there for the Jets are pretty clear at this point. I think you've got Membou. I think you've got, Tyler Warren, who I just discussed yesterday, the tight end at Penn State, who I'm not a big fan of the idea of the Jets picking him at 7th overall. Maybe Ted McMillan falls, who we discussed earlier in the week, a guy who has the potential to be a really good receiver. I'm still holding out hope Mason Graham may fall to the Jets, because I think at the defensive tackle spot, he'd be a very dynamic player, a guy who would be great pairing with Quinn Williams. But there does seem to be a lot of late buzz from Membou. And, look, sometimes the late buzz is an indicator of something going on. I remember 3 years ago at this point, because it was 2022, there was really not much talk about the Jets drafting Sauce Gardner at 4th overall. And then, the last 3-4 days or so before the draft, suddenly it was everywhere. The Jets are really high on Sauce Gardner. So we got the draft. We got the draft day, and that it was clear that the late buzz was definitely an indication of the Jets' interest in Sauce Gardner. There are other cases where it's not. The Jets have every incentive to try and throw teams off the scent. Jets have every incentive to try and put fake information out there of who they're interested in, because if you want a player, you don't want anybody else to know that you want the guy, because then they may try and jump in front of you for him. You want the other teams to be in suspense about who you want, but certainly feels like Armand Membou could be an option for the Jets at 7. And at this point, it seems like he's kind of the consensus pick. Again, if you're going off the mock draft database has him as the pick in over half of recent mock drafts. So we'll see what happens. As we head into a very exciting week. It is draft week next week. But until then, that's all for this episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. We'll be back next week, draft week, to talk more Jets.